Plato's Cave is produced by Muckraker Media. You can find out more at muckrakermedia.org. Welcome to Plato's Cave. I'm Jordan Myers, and today we're going to take another step towards escaping the cave by speaking to Benjamin Burgis. Ben was on the show a while back with John Rosen, and we discussed the topics of free will and moral responsibility, which we talk about again in this episode. Ben, as you will hear, is a lecturer at Georgia State University and deals in many interesting topics. He also hosts a segment on the Michael Brooks Show and is a speaker and writer about many interesting things in philosophy. So we spoke today over Skype, and our conversation was really, really interesting. I loved talking to Ben, even though we disagree about some things. It was a great talk, and I hope you enjoy it as well. So without further preamble, here is our conversation. Actually, on that note, I don't know if you're aware of this, but so I actually, because when you and John came on previously, that was for the podcast called That's BS, right?
Okay.
Actually, in the last couple of weeks, I have started a new podcast called Plato's Cave, which is basically just I sort of separated the two aspects of That's BS between half of the episodes were kind of informal discussion-based shows with like college friends of mine, and then half of the episodes were strictly about like philosophical topics with professors and guests like you and John. And so I've like officially split the shows, and I'm actually using Plato's Cave as sort of the ramp up to my hopeful return to grad school for philosophy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that's going to be the spirit in which this episode is recorded. So I didn't even realize this, but I didn't realize it before we recorded the first episode, but you're a lecturer at Georgia State. Is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And what's crazy is I actually have been looking at that school for the master's program.
Okay. Yeah. At the downtown campus. Sure. Yeah. So it's a good, like I don't teach at the campus where they do the master's program, but it's a good program. I had a former student from when I was teaching elsewhere, who went there, and and I also have a good friend who I went to grad school with who went there. So I heard nothing but good things.
Yeah, it seems just like a really, really well put together program.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. And if you're okay with it, at the end of the episode, I have a few rapid fire questions for you,
Sure.
just sort of about philosophy as a profession in that sense. Okay, cool. But before we get to that, I think we should do the part two to our discussion with John. Yeah. So I guess that, well, it's technically almost a part three, because before was the part two to the Iona podcast with you.
Sure.
But in the spirit of that, I don't want to rehash the rehashing that we did on that episode. But if you could, so we've already said that you're a lecturer at Georgia State. But basically, if you could just give people like the short form of your position on free will.
Sure. So on the question of whether we can, like, so the sort of the interesting question, as I take it to be, is whether we could have free will if we're living in a deterministic universe, which just means like one where, given what's happened so far, there's only one possible thing that could happen in the future. Given what happened in the past, the present is the only possible total physical state of the universe, including all the human actions, of course, including the physical states that are going on in people's brains, and so basically, broadly speaking, you could say, well, no, of course, if that were true, we wouldn't have free will. but thank God it's not, right?
Mm.
Which gets you to what's called libertarianism, has absolutely nothing to do with the political ideology of the same name, but libertarianism about free will.
Mm.
Or you could say no, no, it's not, and but no, it's not, and we do have some pretty good reason to worry that determinism, or at least something pretty close to it, is true. So I guess this free will thing, right? And then my position, which is called compatibilism, which is that even if determinism, the sort of worst case scenario of determinism is true, given past total physical states of the universe, the current total physical state of the universe, including the brain states, is the only one that could happen. But that's still, even if that's true, that's still consistent with the idea that there's some interesting or important sense in which we have free will.
Mm-hmm. So, from someone on the inside of philosophy, it seems like most lay intuitions sort
Uh,
of fall into a very libertarian schema.
mm,
And I think, the immediate sort of like freshman philosophy seminar, once they hear that, oh, we can actually scan people's brains with an fMRI, people tend to very drastically, well, either lock down into that position and say, no, it doesn't matter, or something like that, or swing rapidly to the incompatibilist sense, where they deny that we have any sorts of free will. So how many professional philosophers would you say fall into the compatibilist camp?
yeah, I think compatibilism. I don't know exactly, but I think it's wildly more popular among professional philosophers than among
Mm.
anyone else.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah.
uh,
Which is sort of begging the question, almost.
yeah, because it's
Yeah.
it's because I think that there are uh, that that I think that there's something that like a lot of people have an initial reaction to it, that's like, yeah, come on, right? That's like, you're just playing with words, or you're,
Mm,
or that's not really what I mean,
mhm.
um, or like, uh, that just can't possibly be right, right? That
Yeah.
like that when I say free will, I mean that there's this like garden of forking paths. There are all these different things that might happen, and then which one of these possible futures is realized is really really up to me, right? In some profound sense,
Mm,
and we don't even get the first condition, right?
mhm,
If
mhm.
determinism is true, because there are a bunch of possible futures. There's only one, right?
Mm,
So I think a lot of people have that like kind of very strong intuitive reaction to that, and then I think maybe like thinking hard about it for a much longer amount of time, um, sometimes, but not always, overcomes that reaction, right?
mhm.
But like it's not a but it would be very it would be very rare if somebody just like heard the position explained to them the first time and they're like, well, that's obviously right.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and frankly, if they did, I'd suspect they probably didn't quite
Yeah.
the first time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
uh,
You don't think you're that persuasive?
yeah. I think it takes a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it takes a little bit more. More doing.
Mm,
Um, more doing than that, right?
mhm.
To get people to even kind of really take it seriously, much less sort of say, oh, on balance, this is probably the position that makes the most sense. So,
Mm,
and even among professional philosophers, of course, like there is, even though some sort of compatibilism might be the majority position among people, the people who spend the most time thinking about it or have the most, at stake in it. I'm not even 100% sure if that's true, right?
Mm.
But like, it's but even if it is, right, there's plenty of resistance there too, and one strategy that I think that's very popular in recent decades for kind of overcoming some of that, right,
Mm.
is to be kind of say that, look, there might be an important part of what we mean when we say free will that's not compatible, with determinism. So, like something I think that some philosophers, spend a lot of time worried about, is how much of like traditional philosophical questions are matters of people actually having inconsistent positions on like some on the substance of the issue, and how much of it's just people talking past each other, right?
Mm.
uh, and and I think that and, I think the answer is probably very often a little bit of each, right?
Yeah.
And certainly in this case, in this case it might be so like one. So what a lot of compatibilists now say is, look, uh, maybe one thing that we very often mean when we say free will is freedom to do otherwise, right?
Mm.
And of course there is a long tradition of compatibilists trying to give like compatibilist accounts of what it is to be free to do otherwise. But I think that's what I think is going to probably meet the most intuitive resistance. That's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
come on, that's just not what I mean, right?
Mm.
Like remember if you read the webcomic Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal, there's there's one there that they did making fun of compatibilism, where the mother tells her child, uh, I'm going to take you to see a real live dinosaur, and he gets really excited, and they go to the zoo, and or they go to the park, and she points out at a bird and says that technically that's a
Yeah.
dinosaur, right?
Yep.
And says, oh, come on, you knew what you knew. That's not what I thought you meant when I got this excited about it.
Yep.
And then there's somebody who's like clearly a stand-in for the compatibilist philosopher Daniel Dennett. He has the big
Mm.
beard and everything. Who's like, hey, I'm going to show you free will, right? Same,
Yeah.
same
Yep.
thing, right? So say, okay, so like one thing we might mean is freedom to do otherwise, but like you know, maybe like maybe that really is just incompatible with determinism, or maybe there's a sense in it or whatever. But like we'll give up fighting about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But another thing that it could potentially mean is being in control of your actions in the right way to be responsible for
Mm.
those actions. And of course, if you're a incompatibilist, you probably think that those two are the same thing anyway, right? That like what it is to be in control of your actions, the right way to be responsible for them is to be free to do otherwise. But then there are a bunch of compatibilist arguments that are supposed to show that those two can come apart, right?
Mm.
You can have one without having the other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so like in that vein, because I remember a big portion of our previous conversation was all about this. John was challenging you to resist the Dirk Paraboom slide that sort
Yeah.
of conflates all deterministic causes, and you were pushing back primarily, by saying that. You said this line over and over that because there's gray area in between these two extremes doesn't mean that we can't differentiate between the two extremes.
Right.
Um, and so, because I was listening to it actually yesterday morning again, the episode we did, and I have some notes that might help me understand your position a little bit better. So, So the first thing that we should clarify, and I think you alluded to this, is that neither one of us really in this conversation are waiting sort of on, on call to hear what the neuroscientist or the physicist are
Right.
going to say. Um,
That's right.
and it doesn't, it just simply, I mean, we know that, the mind is what the brain is doing, and we know that, deterministic causes happen. We know that physics is real. So the sense of free will that you're advocating for isn't somehow pushing against the fact that physics is real or that neuroscience is a legitimate science. Um, but the question that I thought might elucidate your position the
Yeah.
most was this. So um, so you said in the previous conversation that you think the debate is about what interesting and meaningful sense of free will exists. So what
Yeah.
I'm wondering then is if you have that same interest, or if sort of this is the key issue for you, is what counts as a deterministic cause. So
Oh,
um,
okay.
we got into this a little bit, like I said, with the Dirk Paraboom four case argument. And just, for people who don't know, I don't remember it exactly, but it's sort of a
Yeah.
slide between there's this perfect inagentic case, or non-agentic case where there's an evil neuroscientist controlling your actions, and clearly you don't have any free will in that case. Uh, and then there's the other side of the spectrum, which I think we spoke about and you elaborated a bit, which is,
Yeah.
there's this person who, for all intents and purposes, is free in the important sense, and that is that they sort of are, a reasonable person. They don't have any sort of, crucial brain abnormalities, no,
Yeah.
physical detention. That sort of like what we would assume is, are you free to sign a legal contract in
Right,
some
right,
sense?
right,
Yeah.
right.
Um, so, and your argument is because, gray area exists in between these two, that doesn't mean we should jettison the distinction. And
Right.
so here's what's interesting to me is, so I'm not sure that a gray area exists, because
Hmm.
I'm sort of viewing all of these deterministic causes, whether it's your genes or your environment or the random radiation from the sun, or more obtuse and more clear instances like a brain tumor,
Hmm.
or physical detention, in the same deterministic category. And you said before that
Right.
a lot of debates are people talking past each other. So I'm wondering if actually the biggest uh, place of the meeting of the minds on this is what we're actually counting as a deterministic cause. So that's something I put to you.
Yeah. So I think that it's important to remember what the purpose of Paraboom's argument is, because this is supposed to be an argument against the compatibilists,
Hmm.
where the idea is, hey, you compatibilists, you say that just having a deterministic cause, right, isn't enough to mean that we don't have free will, or free will in the sense that you're interested in, maybe uh, that you're in control of your actions, responsible for them, and all that stuff. Uh, but but even you guys would admit that if you had the wicked neuroscientist who's like intervening to mess with your brain chemistry to make sure you decided this, that kind of deterministic cause,
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
would mean that we don't have free will, and and so like I think one way of understanding the point of the argument is say, okay, well, what's the difference, right?
Hmm.
Like it can't, because you know my Paraboom would say, right, from Paraboom's perspective, my incompatibilist explanation of what's wrong with all of these things is that they're just causes, right? But that can't be your explanation, right? And then so then I think in the sort of next step, right, the compatibilist said, gives their explanation the principal difference is supposed to be, right? Between the wicked neuroscientists at one end and just less sort of like ordinary day-to-day causal determinism on the other end, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the person, somebody who, as you say, could sign legal contracts, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, right? Like somebody who's just like going about and reasoning and acting in totally normal ways. Uh, but of course, given their environment and the way the brain is evolved and etc., it's no more possible that they could have acted otherwise than the person, the victim of the wicked neuroscientist, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what's the difference? And so popular compatibilist answer I'd go with is to say that well, the difference is, right, that the sort of conditions for having the kind of free will that we're interested in would basically be that reason's responsiveness, that you're in other words that you have a sort of cognitive mechanism where you recognize and are at least somewhat moved by reasons for and against different courses of action, right? And and then that it's your reasons responsive mechanism. That, in other words, that you're not that you're not being manipulated in like you're not just a vessel for somebody else's for some other reasons responsive agent who's like
Mm-hmm.
messing with your brain or something to make sure that you're doing it, but that like you like they kind of own your own reasons responsive mechanism. And one way of understanding that, I mean, obviously it's an analogy, it's fuzzy, but like is to think of it like like owning property, and say that if you just that if you just find some piece of unowned property on the side of the road, right? Like if you just you know if I just find like a brightly colored rock, right? My rock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then that's mine as long as I'm the only person with a claim, to the
Yeah.
rock, right? Whereas if it turns out somebody else, that was their beloved favorite rock, that they were carrying around, and they just accidentally lost it, right? Even though I don't know any different, right? Then I'm not the person with the best claim to the rock, right? So
Mm-hmm.
similarly, in the neuroscientist kind of manipulation case, then I'm not the reasons responsive agent, with the best claim, right, on the decision, right? That I'm really just kind of a vessel of this other one. Okay, but then I think the way that the paraboom thing is supposed to challenge that is to say, well, let's start out with this like really extreme case of manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we do one that's a little bit less extreme and a little bit less extreme, right? And then then we just kind of get down to normal, normal determinism, and it's supposed to seem like very arbitrary, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
you where you draw a line. And of course, from Paraboom's perspective, right, what he thinks is the important difference, right, is what he thinks is important here is just that, hey, these are all, deterministic causes that are all, that are ultimately outside of your control, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's, so they're all the same thing, right? But of course, insisting on that kind of begs the question, right, against the compatibilist, right? So he's not just insisting on that explanation. He's saying that the compatibilist is being arbitrary because they're willing to accept one, but not others. And what and then this is what brings up the answer I kept giving to John, which is that I think that like manipulation is a reasonably clear concept, but like tons of reasonably clear concepts,
Mm-hmm.
you've got this gray zone, right? It's like, okay, well, how much how much manipulation
Mm-hmm.
are we talking about, right? So we have the neuroscientist who intervenes in the moment, the scientist who intervenes when you're a baby to try to set you on the right general course,
Mm-hmm.
and some sort of like maybe we could maybe we could even like add another couple steps to Paraboom's progression, that we
Sure.
could go from, like some extreme cult brainwashing to just
Mm-hmm.
like you know to like pretty extreme levels of social pressure that are somewhere short of that to like whatever. And I think it is very difficult to know where to draw the line, but that's not necessarily more interesting to me than saying that that if you start out with the person with three hairs on their head and they're and we would say that they're bald, you
Mm-hmm.
add a hair, you add a hair, you add a hair, uh, until they look like me, right? At some point, clearly cross the threshold from bald to not bald.
Yeah.
Uh, but like, it would be absurd to say, "Aha, my grand unified theory of baldness." Uh, 998 hairs is the cutoff, right? If you have 997, you're bald. If you have 998, you're not bald.
Mm-hmm.
That I think, like most interested and important concepts, it is somewhat susceptible to having this gray zone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess so just kind of thinking about this. So it's pretty clear to both of us, it seems, that if there if last night in my sleep
Yeah.
there was there's a chip implanted in my head unbeknownst to me that
Yes.
just and it makes me we get off of this call
Yeah.
and I'm driving and it makes me the chip is turned on. It makes me swerve the car and run over a child in a crosswalk, right? um
Yes.
what matters in that case? Well, okay, no, let's make it interesting.
Yeah.
Let's say that there's a chip implanted in my brain, but we don't know if it was turned on or not at the time that I decided to. And it was, let's just pretend we don't need to know how we know this, but I purposefully hit the child, right?
Uh,
Now, it seems like the crucial variable there is whether the chip was turned on or not and what the chip was instructing me to do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the case, and let's say I think our intuitions will align here that if the chip was not turned on and it was not interfering with my decision making anyway, I am in a very real and important sense morally responsible for that decision, right?
Yeah. And this is actually, um, we're one tiny variation away from one of the classical arguments for compatibilism, which is um, that let's say the person, the mad scientist who implanted this chip, wanted to be very careful about, I don't know, maybe it's like a very like early version of the brain chip, and he can only like turn it on a certain number of times,
Hmm.
or he's not sure it'll work if he turns it on too many times, and so he's not going to turn it on. Let's say he set up some cameras in your car, right? He's going to see
Yeah.
what you're going to do, and and all that's important to the mad scientist is that this child die for some reason, right? That they
Hmm.
like that's what he cares about in this. So if it looks like if his sense is that you see the child and you're gonna run him over without him having to turn on the chip,
Mm, yeah.
then he'll just like conserve the energy in his controller or whatever. He won't turn it on. But if his sense from watching you is that he's going to is that you're not going to do it, right?
Mm,
Without him pushing the button and turning on the chip in your head, then he will do it, right?
hmm. Hmm.
Um, and in this case, I think, and what makes it such an interesting case that which actually kind of brings us full circle, about to the question of people's like immediate intuitive responses,
Hmm.
is that most people's immediate intuitive response to this case is that in the version where the mad scientist doesn't have to turn on the chip because you just purposely swerve, on your own, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you didn't even know there's a chip in your head. The chip was never activated. The chip played no role whatsoever in the chain of cause and effect leading up to your decision. Most people's immediate intuitive reaction to that is, yeah, you're absolutely morally responsible for running into the child in this case, which is really interesting because in that case you're not free to do otherwise because all roads were going to lead to running over the child,
Mm-hmm.
right? Either you're going to do it on your own or you're going to do it because the mad scientist activated the chip. So if we still think that you're responsible. In fact, a pretty intuitive way of putting the point would be you're responsible for it because you didn't do it because of the chip in your head. You did it of your own free will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so if you're responsible for it, if it's tempting to even explain that responsibility in terms of a certain sense of free will, even though you weren't free to do otherwise, that strongly suggests that being in control of your actions and the right way to be morally responsible at least can come apart from freedom to do otherwise.
Mm.
Um, which is so. This is the original version of this is Harry Frankfurt, all moral responsibility and alternate possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Is like Black is the bad scientist, and Jones is the
Yep.
person he's manipulating, and so of course this is because this is one of the ways that compatibilists can actually turn the tables and like have most people share their intuition. That this there's this whole cottage industry of papers about this in the last few decades where people have tried to resist this by pushing by like nitpicking the example or any given version of the example, right? Saying no, there's something that there's something that Jones could have done different. He could have tried to resist, or he could have done this or that, right? And then people on board and say, okay, if you don't like that, right, how about this version of it where it seems like there's nothing, where
Mm-hmm.
it seems like he couldn't have even done that, right? And then people will, but like one of my favorite versions of this uh, is a one that is sort of doubles as a version of the grandfather paradox about time travel. So this comes from Joshua Spencer, Martin, the time traveler, during one of his like random jaunts through space and time. He sees goes back to like the 1930s, and there's a tightrope, there's a high wire walker who's about to fall to his death, and Martin is in like there's like a button he can press that
Uh-huh.
activates the safety net, to save the guy, and having no idea who the person is, but just out of general, benevolence, right? He pushes the button to activate the safety net. Um, and But then twist ending, it turns out that the high wire walker was his grandfather,
Mm.
and so you say, well, it looks intuitively, right? We probably think that I mean, he had no idea this guy's his grandfather. That's not why he did it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's morally responsible in a positive sense, right?
Mm.
He's admirable for doing this, even though this looks like a really robust sense of could not
Yep.
have done otherwise, because if he hadn't pressed it, he wouldn't have existed in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That one has always struck me as interesting because I get the point it's making, but it almost seems to muddy the waters with the whole time travel thing because
Sure.
people's intuitions with that vary too. I take the point though. Um, so okay, now I'm sort of wondering if it almost from your view almost comes down to different types of attributability almost.
Okay.
So it seems clear, but correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, that if we can attribute the cause, um, because again, just to clarify for people,
Yeah.
there's sort of two senses of the word responsible. There's like causal, in the
Mhm.
sense of like a physics way where a marble can, knock into another marble and move it. That's like the causal
Right.
sense. And then there's responsible in the term that we're using it, which is a morally rich sense of the word, which is, maybe in Straussonian terms, deserving of reactive attitudes in some
Yeah.
sense, like resentment or blame or punishment. Well, maybe not punishment, but
Right.
um, so what I'm curious about is you seem to be pretty consistent across the board that if we can attribute the main cause or the crucial cause of an action to an external agent, that seems to be suspending of the reactive attitudes or moral responsibility. And it also seems that if the cause is sort of large enough and sort of obvious enough, that you'll also suspend moral responsibility. But when it gets down to sort of granular, very banal, bless you,
Thank you.
senses
Just got my
of
temperature taken. I'm good.
yeah, I don't think I can catch anything across the webcam. um, uh, so so yeah, so it seems like if there's a large enough cause that's sort of clear enough, or obtuse enough, or there's an agent who we can see sort of manipulating the situation, then you're very
Just
willing to suspend the reactive attitudes. But if the causes are sort of granular enough and banal enough, then it seems like we're sort of wanting to, or you're sort of wanting to hold on to moral responsibility. Do you think that
what
accurately describes your view?
I sure hope not. What's the what's an example you have in mind for because you said two things, right? Which the first part sounded right. So they have a so you
Okay.
said that if the so if my decision is caused by manipulation by another agent.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Uh-oh.
Okay,
Hey,
cool.
hey
That's
Ben,
that's it, right? Right. So
can you hear me?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can
we're
hear you.
we're having a little Skype difficulties. Can
Oh,
can we both toggle off our video maybe?
oh, yeah, sure.
So I'm having some bad connections. Sorry about that. Um, okay. Is this any better for you?
This is fine for me. Is it good for you, Jordan?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
Uh,
I think we're good. So sorry. Go ahead.
no problem, no problem. So yeah, if somebody is being manipulated by by another agent, then I think that that means that they're not in control enough to be responsible, right? Like so
Hmm.
in the version of the swerving to hit a child example, where the mad scientist did turn on, uh, did turn on the chip in your head, then I don't think you'd be responsible. I think the mad scientist would be responsible.
Yes.
But you also said if like if there was like a sort of big enough or obvious enough kind of external thing in
Like
a
a
way
brain
that's
tumor maybe.
well, all right, okay, good. So actually, that's helpful. All right, that gives me a better sense of what you have in mind.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's the distinction I would make, right? So because I'd say roughly that there are two conditions at least for being in control of your actions, the sense that I'm interested in. One is just about the way that your decision making process works, and the other is about whether there's like somebody who has a better claim to those decisions than you do, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
the mad scientist cases were all about the second condition.
Mm-hmm.
But if a brain tumor was relevant to if we decided it wasn't morally responsible because they had a brain tumor, then I would say that would be relevant only if it had impacted the first part, like the actual internal structure of your decision-making process. So in other words, like if the effect of the brain tumor, and it's going to be probably going to become very obvious to a medical expert as we keep on going that I don't know very much about brain tumors, uh, but like if the effect of the brain tumor was for example that like it made you like really hyper emotional or angry all the time, and it made it very hard for you to like slow down and think about what you were doing.
Mm.
Then and if the effect was extreme enough, I might say that you weren't in control of your actions the way, because the kind of control of your actions that I'm interested in is about reasoning, right? That you're whether like practical reasoning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like thinking about reasons for and against different different courses of action. And so if what the effect of the brain tumor was that it really inhibited your ability to to recognize uh, reasons for and against an action, or to be somewhat moved by those reasons. Like I sort of vaguely feel like there might be some classic mass shooter cases where brain tumors seem to be relevant somehow, like, but if that were the case, right, I would imagine that the relevance wouldn't be, I would imagine that the relevance would be something like that, right? That that like it led to people, having some like sort of severe chemical imbalance into their brain or something, such that maybe like they were just like overwhelmed by anger, and they couldn't, and the ability of their ability to sort of reason with themselves and get it under control and not necessarily to act on their anger if there were good reasons not to, was just totally decimated by it. Then yeah, that would be that would remove it. But I guess what I would say, that the part of your description that I would push back against a little bit, is that to me the relevant part isn't that the brain tumor is big and obvious, not subtle and granular, right? Like what David Hume calls the like small triggers, in chains of cause and effect that we can't see. It's not that, right? If you had some like, it's that the effect of the brain tumor is to interfere, is to interfere with your reason's responsive mechanism, is to like make it such that you're not reasons responsive up to the kind of threshold that we would want. Whereas there's nothing about determinism per se, right? That just like having a bunch of like subtle things that all put together determine your action. That means that you're not responsive to reasons in the right way, right? So it's not about whether like the chain of cause and effect is like is big and obvious or small and subtle. It's about whether the effect of those causes is to make you incapable of doing this kind of practical reasoning or not.
Okay. No, I think that actually very helpfully clarifies things. So these two parts, the claim to ownership and the reason's responsiveness, are you requiring both of those for moral responsibility, or
Yeah.
just okay? So if we're
Yeah.
lacking in either part, then
Yeah.
okay.
You have to be that, like, maybe right. You have to be responsive to reasons, and the reasons that you're responsive to have to be yours, something like that.
And now, when you say yours, I'm curious where you're drawing the border of yours versus not.
Um,
So sorry, what was that?
just so we don't go down that particular rabbit hole, I think that I think that they would not be mine if I am the victim
Mm,
of manipulation. But this takes us back to but like I think like really getting under the hood of that takes us back to Paraboom,
hmm
and my answer to Paraboom is the same old boring answer,
Yeah.
that I've given several times already.
Yeah. So the thing that I'm interested in now is the sort of in the Straussian terms, the suspension of the reactive attitude. So do you see it as morally permissible or even morally obligatory to suspend the reactive attitude when you have a case where both of these parts to agency aren't met?
Uh, yeah. So I think that I think that the way to think about the relationship, between responsibility and reactive attitudes is that uh, is that maybe what it is to be responsible is for to be like an appropriate candidate for reactive attitudes, or maybe for those reactive attitudes to like right, so
Hmm.
it's not like I really like Ryan Lake, friend of mine has written about this, has like a metaphor about like how it's not like some like Nietzsche would say that like when you feel guilt, you're like punishing yourself, right? And Ryan would like deny that, right? He'd say that like it's not that you're like punishing yourself with feelings of guilt. It's just that like guilt is the sort of appropriate feeling that kind of fits certain kinds of wrongdoing or whatever, kind of the same way that like the feeling of heartbreak fits romantic loss.
Hmm.
And if you're not particularly prone to either, that doesn't make you a bad person or anything, right? Uh and if you do, I don't know, if you blame some if you like blame somebody for what they've done when it's actually not objectively their fault, I'm not sure if that's exactly morally wrong. I'd certainly say there's something like inapt or inappropriate about it. Like uh, I remember seeing a study once about some you know no idea why this would be gender specific, but and maybe I'm just a sexist and I'm misremembering the study. But I remember seeing a study once where there was some shockingly high percentage of women who said in the study that they'd felt anger at their romantic partners because of something that happened in a dream, right?
Hmm.
You say, well, if you were the person, your wife or girlfriend felt angry at you for something you'd done in a dream, right? I don't know that you would exactly think that she was doing something morally wrong, but you'd certainly feel like there was something that was a little bit, that like that. You'd certainly feel like this was inappropriate,
Yeah.
there was a lack of fit between the feeling and the situation. And then if we go beyond reactive attitudes to like actual action in the world that might be premised on those reactive attitudes, right? Like punishment, for
Hmm.
example. Certainly, if you're being punished for something that's not objectively your fault, then yeah, I think that would definitely be morally wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Can we toggle video back on just to see if it works? The bandwidth
Yeah.
seems to be improving.
Yep.
Um, okay, so that makes a good bit of sense to me. Because I guess so. So I'm thinking about this in terms of actually my writing sample for graduate school is on critiquing Christine Korsgaard's view on this. Um, but it's interesting that I hugely disagree with her.
Uh-huh.
Um, but what's really interesting is I can't disagree with the fact that she and Strawson really view this sort of reactive attitude and holding responsible as something that's integral to really, what it means to be an interpersonal individual, right?
Mhm.
And so if I were to suspend those attitudes or those evaluations of people completely, that would be a a very lonely existence.
Right.
But I also can't I can't also get away with the fact that she because Korsgaard obviously takes the Kantian route of saying that it is never appropriate to suspend the reactive attitude, and that also seems equally preposterous to me. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's
because I mean, surely we want to allow for some imposition of these external causes, whether it's the claim to ownership or the reason's responsiveness. And it
yeah.
seems,
I wonder how. No, I'm just curious, like
yeah.
how far she would take that, right? Because like I'm just wondering about just like sort of like really ordinary mundane examples,
Hmm. Hmm.
like you're I don't know, like like you have like your elderly grandfather can't take
Yeah.
care of himself, has been like living in the house now, and he and because because he's so because he's so out of it, he does something that that would be like really out of line if any of the other members of the household do it. But like I think normally we say, don't get mad, grandpa doesn't know any better, right?
Yep.
Like
Yep.
so I wonder if she's really saying that no, you're
Yep.
denying grandpa's personhood, don't do that.
Hmm. Well, I mean, no, that's totally one of the main points of my objection to her is because she claims, and I argue that her views tie her to being committed to that sort of unwavering, uh, agentic view of people, but it commits her to things that I cannot imagine that she would actually hold to herself. I I actually open up the essay with teasing that I wouldn't want to be friends with Christine Korsgaard because she would be committed to, because I think it's equally as integral to interpersonal relationships to suspend the reactive attitude in some cases, just as it's equally important to not suspend it in every case, right? Um, so like, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, but if you have like a friend or something that is just, you can't always roll up your sleeves and get into the mud with them on every single thing
Yeah,
they think or
sure.
every single thing they say, because that would just be torturous. Um, and to your example of maybe like a grandfather with dementia or Alzheimer's or something, he's just losing his mental faculties. To hold him responsible would be, I mean, counterintuitive to say the least, because you would be, arguing with someone who was incapable of argumentation or trying to reason with someone who was, you know, not sensitive to reason itself. So it commits her to sort of like a paradoxical view. And it's interesting. It's just because I think she sees, whether consciously or not, the light at the end of that tunnel, and then sort of tries to veer out of it a little bit by offering caveats like she I can't quote it directly, but in her essay, Creating the Kingdom of Ends, she has these weird little caveats that seem to understandably try to make room for these exceptions, but they go
Right.
against what she's logically committing herself to, and that's a big basis of my critique of the essay.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, especially if she's because like um at least as you describe it, I don't know this essay, although I might read it today. I mean, what the hell else am I gonna do? I'm in quarantine, but uh, but like especially the way you're describing it makes it sound like she's not just talking about sort of like feeling reactive attitudes, like like okay, somebody says something ridiculous and I feel some irritation or whatever,
Mhm.
but like if treating people as agents really means that I go beyond just feeling this to like trying to like argue with them to like correct them, right?
Mm.
Then that would really just be intolerable, right? I mean, like that's like it's
Yeah.
like the real world version of that XKCD cartoon. So there's somebody on the internet is wrong. Like that's
Yeah,
not like
just spend
you know
hours.
yeah, if you really went around your
Hmm.
face-to-face life like that, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you just like can't abide somebody being like being in error or doing something wrong, without correcting it. Then that really seems like like that really seems like somebody you want to cross the street to avoid.
yeah. With that, I mean, so that's the thing. Is what A, I agree with you, and B, she, again, I mean, that's really like a central part of the critique of her is that I don't think she actually does clarify that. Because I think she, like I said, she logically commits herself to that conclusion, but then sort of backs away from it in nuanced ways that I agree with, but I don't know that she's permitting herself to do with her own argumentation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's yeah, it's interesting in that sense. And I don't know exactly what the linkage is. Like you were saying, maybe a rereading of the essay with that question in mind would be useful, but I don't know if she really explicates the distinction between holding an attitude and taking an action. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because we might want to, I think we should probably want to keep that distinction available to us. Like I could hold the reaction, for instance. Here's a great example. Okay, so at a Thanksgiving dinner or something,
Yeah.
uh, if I have, because I from what I've seen from your political stuff, we have very similar political leanings,
Yeah.
and and I have an extremely conservative family, an extended
Yeah.
family too. So at a Thanksgiving dinner, for instance, let's say a relative of mine says something kind of repugnant
Right.
about Mexican immigration or something like that, right? I
Mm-hmm.
can feel the reactive attitude very strongly towards that relative. However, I can choose to be strategic in my actions and just say, okay, maybe minute 20 of an hour long dinner isn't exactly the right time to just open up that Pandora's box, right?
Yeah, totally. Right.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. That and I'd be uh yeah, and the people who are the least capable of restraining themselves that way are the people you'd want to spend the least time around. Absolutely. That and actually that's a really nice example because in that case I think that it would be like I would um, maybe feel a little bit more of an intuitive pull towards saying that like I don't know that I would quite go as far as maybe necessarily as to say that it'd be wrong if you didn't, but like but like I would maybe be like worried about you if you didn't feel the reactive attitude, right?
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
not like but
Hmm.
but not expressing it seems very wise, right? Like like
Yeah.
hey, we're all gonna be here for at least another 40 minutes and then the game comes on and
Yep.
right.
Yep. Yeah. No. No. And the thing is I honestly I haven't read all of her work on this, so it's
Mhm.
possible that I'm missing something. Where she does draw a distinction between the two, but honestly, from what I've read in she has an essay creating the kingdom of ends, and then she also has a book, Morality as Freedom.
Mhm.
Or no, Morality as Freedom is a chapter in a book by the same name, I think.
Okay.
Creating the
Yep.
Kingdom of Ends. But I think there's an essay and there's a book and they're different. But yeah, it so it seems like, if I read her essay and I buy it hook, line, and sinker, then I am sort of, at least logically speaking, committed to always going around as sort of just this like this uncontrollable reactivity machine. And it just seems to me that like it the latter part of the essay, from my essay, is kind of trying to lay out maybe when it's morally permissible, or even obligatory, to suspend the reactive attitudes. And it just seems like, in a case, where it might be like a grandfather, say, a hypothetical one, let's say,
Uh,
um, who, it is so apparent to me, like it is like, this is like the most morally clear thing in my life, that he is just not going to be receptive to
right.
reason on this, right?
Yeah.
And and so it's just that is when I do sort of truly embody the objective attitude with respect to him, and just say, this line of reasoning isn't really available to him. Like, it kind of violates your two parts to moral agency. He has the claim to this ownership,
Yeah.
but he doesn't have the reason's responsiveness. Um,
Okay.
in some non-trivial sense, I think. And that's different than just, I think that can be easily conflated with just calling someone dumb, or saying, oh, he's just,
Uh,
some old Republican or something. But like, in a non-trivial sense, like that conclusion is really unavailable to him, you know.
uh-huh.
And so that's a case in which I think, for instance, the objective attitude really is appropriate. Notwithstanding, it allows you to maintain the relationship also.
Yeah, I mean, I also, yeah. So I think in that case, that's plausible. I also wonder if, they're probably, there's probably like a plausible version of the case where, uh, maybe if, there's a sense in which, if you, like 500 hours of arguing about this or whatever, like,
Sure.
like maybe you can come around, but like
Yeah.
it's just like, um
It's like that
it's it,
time though.
it's not worth it,
Hmm.
that's like you're probably you never get that far in the first place, right? That's
Yeah.
because like, you'd run out of steam, or he'd run out of steam, or
Yeah. Yeah.
like it just seems like there could be all sorts of, even if you think that, like, you know maybe he could, he could be persuaded, but like but like, you're not only are you not required to acts of like argumentative heroism on that level, but like, but maybe we wouldn't even really, admire you if you were prone to them, right? Like
Yeah.
if you like I'm thinking about, I don't know if there's a classic essay by Susan Wolf called Moral Saints.
Yep. The great
Uh,
essay. Yeah.
yeah, where she argues very convincingly to me, that we wouldn't, that like on reflection, none of us would really want to be moral saints, and we probably wouldn't want to be friends with moral saints, and
No.
like that they have, we don't have the like there are non-moral dimensions to our intuitive conception of like a life well lived and all this stuff,
Mm.
and so, like maybe, like if somebody who is just like really that inclined to like always, um like always like make engage in every desperate uphill struggle to like morally reform every person around them, like
Hmm.
would just be deficient in some of those other like dimensions of like what we admire in a person, that
Yeah.
they'd just be, that like, we also like, you know, we also value, family, or we also value just,
Mm.
like having nice dinners or just quiet or whatever, right? Like
Yeah. Just.
that there are all these other values in the mix, and so like on balance, on balance, you should like, even if even if you think there is that possibility that like if you were really willing to do the deep dive down into the
Mm.
pond of of grandpa's reasons, then like then like maybe you could like maybe you could get him to you could get him to come around, but like you know would you really want to be the guy who
Yeah.
who's always trying to do that?
Yeah. And if you are the guy who's always trying to do that, um, it's just, I think it is also a burden on other people too.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, like just, to put it from my perspective, if it was the reverse, because it's interesting because I'll take the objective attitude in reverse too.
uh,
Where, they'll, I guess this is sort of a point that doesn't come up much anymore, but again, my entire family is like deeply, deeply religious.
uh,
And when I was in high school, I had kind of, I hadn't seen the wisdom yet in just making some non-committal remarks and then moving on, and and
yeah,
and engaging in those conversations is sort of just a lose-lose for everyone because, if you're engaging with the wrong people, they're not going to understand what you're saying. And it's just like a pure pot of misery for everyone involved,
yeah.
So I think in
I
those
know.
cases, when they would ask about, like, are you attending a church in college and stuff like that, it's you have to walk a fine line between lying and just pulling back the curtain and just saying everything, Uh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I remember a story about my my wife's ex being asked while he was back uh, in uh, with his family in Texas, and his
Mm.
mother really wanted him to go to church with her, and he didn't he didn't want to, and so far I'm sympathetic to him, right?
Hmm.
Like at this point in the story, right? Like that's not like it's like
Yep.
yeah. No reason he should have to do that, right? I mean, he's in his 20s, he's like he should, like, whatever. But then, like his stated reason, and I always thought this was the hilarious part, was that was that if like somebody like as it was breaking up were to like tell him like that uh, God bless him or something like this, that he would feel duty bound to explain to them the error of their ways.
Yeah.
Really? Like it's not like
It totally loses all the sympathy he had going for him. Yeah, no, that it is really, really interesting. And I think, to circle back around, I think that is why her position is so unreasonable. She loses the nuance to life there. Where I mean sometimes you really do have to choose, and it's not easy by any means to choose which attitude is appropriate in every condition. And I think a lot of people, myself included, choose the wrong attitude sometimes. But to categorically say that the objective attitude is never warranted is I just think it's deeply, deeply unreasonable and unpragmatic too.
Mhm.
But I mean, to give her credit where credit's due, I think she and Strawson um, I think they correctly diagnosed the condition of suspending the reactive attitude. Also, it is, I mean, you do have to bite the bullet, and this is why it can't always be appropriate. That you really are degrading the status of the person whom you take the objective attitude with respect to, right? Like if I in this conversation take the objective attitude towards you, I think Ben's just he's unreachable right now. Um, I'm not even going to bother to bring up this contradiction in his logic or something, right? That is degrading you and your status of personhood, and so I think that's really what's driving Korsgaard's rejection of the objective attitude. But I think it should be more evaluated in the sense of this is why we should be cautious about it, and can't do it all the time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That there's something, yeah, like that you're, there's certainly, there's certainly something condescending about it, right? It's like, oh, he's just not going to get it,
Yeah.
like that's, so like on that level, I get the, I get the driving intuition, but if you, but yeah, like surely whatever. I mean, I know we've just been agreeing with each other for quite a while about this, but surely you have to, you have to pick your battles, and if not just in terms of, I mean, partially in terms of your chances are of success, and also just partially in terms of all of these other factors, that you don't want to be, you don't want to be annoying and all this stuff. So, so which I guess makes, as at least as a initial reaction, before reading the essay, makes me think that, makes me suspicious of describing it in quite such extreme terms, right? Like, are you really treating somebody as an object rather than an agent? By doing this, like maybe you are if you like consistently, do it towards them, right? That they, but like, if we're like, if we're interested in making sense of interpersonal relations, and not calling for a sweeping reform of interpersonal relations, right? That like we all need to like, we all need to go around like arguing with each other all the time, right? Then I think I'd want to turn down the dial a little bit to like, to like, okay, like maybe to the extent that part of your reasoning is that you don't think that they would get it, maybe, maybe that is a little bit objectifying, but but I don't know. And I don't know. I mean, maybe there's an interesting undiscovered tension in my views here too, because I think that since we've been talking about this, I've been primarily thinking about this not so much with my my like free will hat on as with my like sort of like thinking about how persuasion works hat on, right? That's and from the second one, it seems overwhelmingly obvious that like, obviously, we do, we change our minds about things, and arguments clearly do play a role in that process, but it's also, but like, I think even in ordinary cases where like people aren't like terribly irrational in various ways, like we still think that like, it's sort of, we don't think it's an automatic lock, right? Like that, like
Mm.
just given that, like, if you're a reasonably rational person, then like just given that the argument is a good one, right? And you're exposed to it, right? That you'll like automatically, you'll
Yeah.
automatically be brought around, right? I mean, that's probably not realistic. We think it's got to be like the sort of, you know, the right argument presented in the right way at the right time when you're
Mm.
open to it for all sorts of reasons,
Hmm. Hmm.
and which is why I think it so often is the case. Certainly in my experience, I think more generally, right? That like that when we're convinced by arguments, it's not when we first hear them, right?
Yeah.
That like you think, especially if you're especially first hear them in the course of a an argument in the other sense, right? Like you're where your ego is very bound up with with what position you're taking, and like really what I find happens to me much more often is that like the best parts of an argument against my position will sort of like gradually gnaw at me over time, right?
Hmm.
And I'll kind of maybe come to see their full force like much later, when I kind of happen to think back to it, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's like, oh man, that was a really good point, wasn't it?
Yep, yep. No, no, that I think that's an accurate way of how most people, myself included, change their mind. Um, yeah. So okay, so after we get off the call, I'll send you just like the
Yeah.
title of the paper or whatever,
Yep.
just so I'm recommending you the correct one.
Yep. Yep.
But before we do that, do you have a couple minutes for some rapid fire philosophy questions?
Yeah. Yeah. Go for it.
Cool. So yeah, in the spirit of taking wisdom from people who are doing what I want to do,
Yep.
what piqued your interest in philosophy as just more than an interest as a profession?
Mhm. Uh, well, I guess like I kind of probably like a lot of people end up going into philosophy. I'd taken classes in a lot of different things undergrad. And it was just kind of like trial and error. I realized that I liked this, which I think is probably a function of the fact that Americans don't typically take philosophy in high school.
Yeah.
Uh, which so then and then I think it was just some combination of getting really into the philosophy classes I was taking, and maybe just kind of getting really into school in general, right? Like uh, which is something that kind of happened for me in like sort of late
Yep.
college,
Hmm.
and then also, frankly, I mean, like at the time, like during my last like year or so of college, I was when I wasn't taking classes, I was working at my which is like a big grocery store chain in the upper Midwest, loading and unloading boxes from trucks, and the thought of getting to like the thought of like getting paid to like um, teach and grade papers and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Like I think sounded
Yep.
very appealing to me, to that circumstances. So
Yeah.
I think like a lot of people, I just kind of fell into it sideways.
Yeah. Were you ever unsure or in a position where it looked like it wasn't going to happen?
Yeah, for sure. So, well, okay. So for one thing, I double majored in history and philosophy undergrad. I remember there was a minute when I was thinking about, applying to grad school in history instead of philosophy. And certainly, in the not going to narrow now because it'd be way too depressing, but like, in the sort of like, ups and downs of the job market over the years, like, there were certainly times when it seemed like, it wasn't happening, and like, and I was, and like I did definitely have some serious moments of being like, well, shit, what do what's you know what else can I do with my life right now,
Yeah.
right? You know.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's totally fair. What, so this is related to what we were talking about, but what's the last thing you changed your mind about as a result of reading a piece of philosophy?
Ooh, oh, nice. That's a good question. Oh, the last thing. Um, um, yeah. I mean, I think that, well,
Nothing. You're right about everything.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, man, this is the burden of always being right the first time.
Yeah.
No, no, I've definitely, definitely changed my mind about some stuff. I think that I'm trying, although this kind of does go to the point about how it's often a kind of very partial and nebulous, process. But I think, but my friend Mark Warren, went to grad school with, teaches in Buffalo right now. He uh, I used to, I used to argue with him a lot um, about like, well, roughly expressivism and deflationism about morality,
Mhm.
um, and I certainly, it's fresh in my mind because like I just read a paper he sent me like about this yesterday, right? And certainly I couldn't pin it down, right? But like I certainly, while reading exactly when the transition happened, but like I remember, as I was reading the paper yesterday, being struck that like, I agreed with a lot more of this than I used to, when I
Mhm.
argued with him about it, right? So yeah, I mean that's certainly a change. So like broadly speaking, going back to like kind of the issue we kind of touched on and in passing earlier about thinking about how many sorts of debates in certain kinds of fields or matter of people talking past each other, or like the sort of maybe sophisticated way to put that would be like, um, like sometimes things look like they're debates about how reality is, but maybe they're best understood as sort of, the fancy phrase is, meta linguistic negotiations. Like they like, what really uh, what we're really arguing about is like how to use certain key terms, and and I think that the idea that this sort of framework could accommodate a lot of what's going on in certain kinds of arguments about, about like mathematics, and even about, even about moral judgments, that that were, that even if it has like a certain kind of like social coordinating function, that, that we have to decide a determinate answer to, right? Because like we have to figure out what to do, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But like, but that said, that we're not necessarily, it's not that they're like, um, it's not that there are like pre-existing moral facts that we're like coming across, right? We're sort of, that we're maybe, uh, that we're really just kind of like having this like, incredibly complicated sort of, negotiation about like how to, um, how to use certain kinds of moral categories and stuff, in order to figure out how to act together. Something along those lines seems much more plausible than it used to be to me. But like, I realize that's very far. Like it would sound so much better if I could just be like, I changed my mind about epistemic externalism. I did a year and a half ago,
Yeah.
when I read this, but like
Yeah.
it's all so fuzzy, right? Because it's like you read a bunch of things, and then over the course of time, you kind of start to
Yep.
realize that like you're that like you sort of shifted to a certain degree over to this other position, but you're not quite sure when it happened, and I don't.
Yep. Yep. No, I totally empathize with that. For me, I mean, philosophy is just like it is the field that for myself at least is best at just it is like a slap in the face of, oh, you were so sure about this position, and
Uh,
let me just disabuse you of that
uh,
like certainty. Yeah. Okay, cool. So last two questions. What do you enjoy most and least about your job?
okay. Uh, that's uh, that's way easier. So the part that I enjoy the most is the actual like classroom interaction, the discussions, the people like the actual like in class part of teaching philosophy is a lot of fun. Like for reasons that are so as a uh, professor I had in grad school who teaches at Toronto now, Nick Stang, who told me once that he'd as an undergrad he double majored in math. He was thinking at one point about going to graduate school in math, and part of what got him to do philosophy was said, all right, well, look, in either field, unless you're incredibly lucky, right, you're probably going to end up mostly teaching like very low level introductory classes, right?
Hmm.
And the gap between the questions that you are exploring in like college algebra or whatever, right? Like
Yeah.
introductory level math classes that you would teach, and what you're actually interested in as a mathematician is like this.
Yeah.
And the gap between the questions that you're exploring in intro to philosophy class, what you're interested in as a professional philosopher is like this, right? Like
Yeah.
there are no interesting unsolved problems in college algebra. Intro to philosophy is nothing but interesting unsolved problems, right? So
Hmm.
and like a lot of the pleasure of it is seeing that play out, right? That people have, like you were talking about, these kind of slap in the face, epiphanies, like that actually happens all the time, right?
Yep.
In intro to philosophy. Um, but the part that I like the least is grading. That's not a hard that's not a hard question, which really which is really like above and beyond the mass death and everything is really a additional layer of the tragedy of what's going on right now,
Yep.
because teaching online is like you lose out the thing that's best about teaching,
Yep.
and it's like 90% the thing that's the worst about it.
Yep. Yep. All right. Final question. What piece of advice from your experiences would you give to someone like me who is applying to programs?
Okay. um, well, you know, you said you're looking at Georgia State, so I think that's a good, that's a good instinct. I went to a very similar. I went to Western Michigan for my master's degree, which is the same kind of deal as far as
Hmm.
the master's program goes. So I think that's a good like, like if you have. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like maybe in your case you'd be fine, going straight into a PhD program. Like you certainly know a lot more about this stuff than I did coming out of undergrad. But I think, I mean, I guess uh, I mean, I guess the like, um, I guess the less fun advice would be to think in advance about both like about what's going to happen afterwards, both in terms of like, okay, if you don't end up, you know, okay, like if you go to graduate school and you get out and you have and you know you get into like a tenure track job within a couple of years or something, then great, right? But like if you don't, right? What are your uh, are you kind of willing to just sort of bounce around with like the sort of more precarious versions, right?
Mm.
Of an academic teaching career. If not, what's the backup plan? That might be something to think about. And I guess related to that, the it's it's worth thinking at some point within maybe the first couple of years of grad school about the balance between like obviously look nobody's the fact that like the fact that going to philosophy grad school at all is like is like prioritizing doing what you like over over doing what's the maybe the wisest in a certain way, right? Like anybody who can get into graduate school of philosophy could get into law school, and that's probably a better bet, right? But like
Yeah.
but like within that, it'll be worth thinking about like like sort of marketability of what like what you write your dissertation on. You're not signing a contract to like this is what I'm going to spend all my time thinking about for the rest of my life, right? you know but it is but like but you might want to like sit down at some point and think about like okay um if even if like what really like makes me passionate is thinking about like the metaphysical status of mathematical objects or something, right? Like that's like is you know um are you going to have a much better chance of getting a job when you get out if it's like bioethics or something like that?
Hmm.
And you're really not selling your soul if if you do that, right? Like you can you can go right back to spending a lot of your time thinking about the mathematical objects in a few years,
Yeah.
but that's I mean I guess that would be I don't know a lot of it, but that would be the practical advice that I know.
No, it seems extremely practical. All right, Ben, thanks so much for coming back on for a part two.
All right, my pleasure. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah, I will. I'll send you that article title. But otherwise, thank you again, and I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that discussion. I know I really, really enjoyed having it and speaking to Ben. So in the show notes below, I will include links or titles to all of the papers that we referenced and all of Ben's information. So what you can do to support me and this show if you enjoyed it and found it valuable is go to patreon.com/Jordan Myers. That's JORDANMYERS. There you can support me on a monthly basis and receive rewards for your donations as well. My Patreon supporters are the direct reason why this show is able to continue happening. You can also support it in non-monetary ways by sharing the show on social media or specifically Twitter, which is where I operate. You can rate it on Apple Podcasts so that more people find the show. You can like this video on YouTube or subscribe via RSS feed or on YouTube. You can discuss it on your own show and drive up traffic to it that way. Or you can contact me and connect me with recommended guests or topics to cover. You can contact me at platoscavepodcast@gmail.com no apostrophes in that, or on Twitter at Jordan_C_Myers. And as always, thank you so much for listening or watching, and continue struggling to escape the cave. Thanks. Plato's Cave is produced by Muckraker Media. You can find out more at muckrakermedia.org.